Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Notes from the Aleph. An Aleph is a high point from which all things are visible, and from a vantage point, we'll be looking at tabletop role-playing games, their design, and the theory behind those designs. Around here, our motto is to be fair, build up, and have fun. I'm your host, GriffinVarro, joined by our editor, Theta, our local designer, Norman Rafferty, and our good friend and GM, Lessons Learned. When it comes to tabletop role-playing games, I have 15 years of experience running, playing, and frequently fixing problematic rule sets at the table. Pronouns are he, him, they, them. Rafferty, you go next.
Hello, world. I'm Norman Rafferty, he, him. I work for Sanguine Games, where, crummy heck. We're in Sanguine for the last 20-odd years, and was working in gaming another 10-odd years before that.
And Lessons.
And I'm running a game of Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, World of Greyhawk, Into the Wild Coast every Sunday. And I run other games as well, including went before that a little bit of other games, and just blanked out. And I'm all Iron Claw. I'm so sorry, Rafferty. And I also I'm a published author over at Amazon, Night and Stars, and 99 cents. You can pick it up before the new year. And I'm here on Twitch under Lessons Learned 1. The 1 is important, and over Lessons Learned over at YouTube.
All right. So, if you've sat down to play a rogue, you probably ended up wanting to hide a lot. Why? Well, because you can get your sneak attack that way. Or perhaps you chose a battle buddy, so you're always flanking with someone. Or maybe you've had too many counters with fire monsters, and you've just started putting all of your points into fire immunity forever. When we sit down to play, we're in control of what we do, but what we choose to do is influenced by the game itself, and often by the varied rules that it sets down. This can be true regardless of the rule, and can lead to both good behavior and bad behavior. And it all depends on what's written down. Today, we'll be talking about all the ways the rules guide and endorse player behavior.
I'd like to kick it off, if I may.
Go for it.
Because I think this is part of what I will call the Ludo imperative, which is essentially a game when video games and tabletop RPGs have three things. The things that they demand the player to do, the things that the rules expect you to do, and the things that the game encourages you to do. And why make the distinctions? Like, for example, in a heavy combat game, you're expected to always do combat. That's first. That's the man. If you don't do combat, you're not kind of doing the game. It also encourages you to do things like, say, for example, the example being a rogue, right? You don't have to sneak, but you got all these points of sneaking, so might as well do it, right? And on top of that, things that they encourage you to do, such as, find new ways to kill things. You could be sneaky about it, or find, do traps or something like that, because the game gives you that option to do it differently. Or it could be diplomacy or something else, right? And I think when we're talking about rules enforcing behavior, we have to look at the things that rules say you have to do, or at least very strongly suggest, and then the other things that are, adjacent to it, but not strictly set up to
things that happen because of the rules, but not because the rules explicitly state you must do it, but because it's the obvious decision to make.
Exactly. I mean, that's where our rules endorse behavior come from. I like the ludic imperative.
Yes.
I like how badass that sounds, but it's also the reason why we use the word endorse was that it gets back to what I like to call hammer theory, which is when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when you're a fighter in D&D, when all you know how to do is combat, every problem in the game you look at as how can I solve this using combat? This gets into what we were talking about earlier with like class-based or skill-based with, what do we spend our points on? I mean, one of the big problems that you run into in gaming is because gaming, for the most part, forces specialization on players. Don't learn talking or diplomacy. Swift Ed over here is the master of diplomacy. You'll never have his plus 15 bonus. It's a waste of your time. You should make all of your efforts on something else. And so you wind up with a party where everyone is maxed out in one thing, no matter what. And if any of those people are separated, like there's so many jokes about, oh yeah, the orc barbarian was left all by himself to do diplomacy, so he flipped the table and butchered everybody. In the end, we got the contract anyway.
This is a great example of part A, and I think part B, we could also look at the same thing for another example of where the rules give you an implicit goal, and that ends up being the focus of everything, because as everyone knows, you only get experience from killing the monsters. So making a deal with them, or taking their treasure, or avoiding them, or letting them run away means you get nothing.
I mean,
So you
it's
are
weird.
encouraged to murder.
Before we get all the angry comments, like people will point out the rules don't actually say that. And it's like, yes, the rules do have this little sidebar that say that conquering story objectives and that kind of stuff. But
But
that's
the explicit
secondary.
rules are you kill a monster, you get experience, and
Yeah,
you want to get experience to level up.
yeah, here's all their rankings, and here's all the rewards you get, and and here's every monster listed specifically with the looting rewards you get, the treasure types and loot drops specifically for every monster. And here are published adventures where every monster sits in a room, attacks you on sight, and attacks until it's dead. And my favorite thing to gong to beat on, here's a scripted adventure where you will go to certain locations and people will attack you, asking no questions and giving none. And then, so in other words, yeah, it's like if you want to be trying, the game is written in, it goes back to what I was complaining about with Endgame World of Warcraft, where the games are written, you can solve them any way you want. So obviously you're going to solve them the one way you know.
Right, and it's obviously not even that it's bad that the rules are this way. It's more that it goes up against what is expected, because the question is, what is this game about? And if D&D is presented as, it's the game where you can role play being a sexy kobold and seduce the dragon and do all this cool stuff, but the rules are you only bother with murder, then there's some bad juxtaposition there. Some dissonance, that's the word I'm looking for.
The ludic imperative might
ludonarrative dissonance, that's what I'm looking for.
Ludonarrative dissonance is when the game is ludonarrative dissonance is also where the game is encouraging you to do something and the story is going in a different direction. Like my poster child for that is any cutscene where the bad guy kills you instantly, or where the bad guy kills someone instantly while you watch and can't stop them. Because it's like, hey, I have all these superpowers and skills and abilities, and I was specifically waiting for that to happen, but you can't do anything about it, which does happen in gaming.
This is why I use the term ludonarrative. Use the ludo imperative to contrast it with the narrative imperative. What makes sense in a story, or where the story says, okay, this needs to happen next, can often clash with the things that, as a player, because you're playing a game, can or should be able to do.
I mean, that happens to me all the time. That's why I was complaining in previous podcasts about how they'll have a story and I'll say, this one common spell from the basic book solves the entire problem. Mm-hmm. And everyone will just stare at me saying, well, that would derail the story. And on the one hand, I want to say, yeah, that's kind of nice that, your story is supposed to go like that. But on the other hand, I'm not reaching. This is a common ability that is available to almost everyone, and is available to us, and it would solve the whole problem. So I don't know why we wouldn't do it when we can. I know your story requires us to do other stuff, but that drives me crazy because it pulls me out of the world.
I think that gets into a completely different situation, which is whether or not the GM or DM is a director or a set designer, right? As I like to make the decision, right? Are they setting up the world for you to play in and be a player with you, or do they bring their stories like, okay, here, Tommy, this is your line, go and stand there. Jimmy, could you please bring in the fireball at this point? And Susie, could you just try to slap somebody in the face to make them start a fight or something, right?
Yeah.
And that I don't think that's the meat of what we're talking about today. It's a very cool subject, but so I want to get back into track. Go ahead.
I think tangenting off of that, though, I think it probably would be good to mention that even the person running the game is influenced by the rules here. And like you said, in the choice between being a set designer or a director, if you're encouraged to create groups of monsters specifically for the players to kill to give them experience so that they can level up, then you're also being guided down that track. And that's what every one of your games is going to start to look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
And I'm going to throw my angry fist in the air and saying that there's no difference between the game rules and the narrative. People are going to tell me that Ready Player One is a good book and a good movie. You know.
That was serious.
Or, you know, there's a whole bunch of isekai anime out there, like Sword Art Online, or even sillier stuff like Yu-Gi-Oh! and freaking Pokemon. Like in Pokemon, they're constantly talking to. Now, people will point out that you know, they're constantly breaking the rules of the game and the stories of those things. And we can talk about the opposite of the ludic imperative. We can talk about the Mercer effect, which is where everyone gets along, and when the story changes or throws people for a loop, everyone rolls with it. You know, because people always complain, the Mercer effect is when people say, how come, you know, the streamed games that I watch go so much better than my games at home? And the short answer is because those people are paid.
Yeah, people aren't professional improvisational actors who are ready for this and looking to put on a show for you. I mean, they're people who are there for their entertainment.
If every time I argued with you, you gave me $5 to shut up, man, both of our lives would be so much better.
Hold up. I can stop this whole podcast right now. I got like $20 for the both of you
right
PayPal
here.
Me now. Here you guys
go. You know, just you know, like, but more realistically, I think the issue I often have with the idea of game being different than narrative is that game rules in a role-playing game, the rules are how you express your reality. Like, if I'm playing a fighter, we're not going to talk about whether I'm using Heaven Grip or Earth Grip, how I've trained my muscles, or how I attack the 5 quarters of the body, or how well my parry 9 is. We're not doing all that martial stuff. In fact, many GMs won't even have a map. That's too much for them. Instead, we're going to abstractify this and say, okay, you get to roll this and add this bonus, and every now and then you get to make a second attack roll. Maybe you're a martial and guy, I don't know. Right. So we're using the game rules to define the world. I'm not allowed to describe, and when he comes at me, I'll go ahead and do the floor lunge so I can get up and under, you know, into his. I'm not allowed to do that. That won't actually give me an advantage in the description. In fact, that's bad form in a role-playing game to draw out the game and describe everything I'm doing just to get out of skill rolls.
Or rather, it's bad form to describe the thing you want to do and then roll it and then go, well, I guess none of that happened or none of it mattered at all because that's not what reality was.
Well, good improv is supposed to be that you're supposed to leave it open-ended. Like most players, when they improv something, will say, I stab him in the face, and not, I point my dagger at his face. They don't say that.
You want action, not the reaction, until you have a result.
Right. Yeah. But also, like, I don't know like how fireballs actually work in the real world. And if you dig into these D&D books especially, they get extremely specific. Like fire, like lightning bolts and fireballs do not destroy walls or furniture. They're very specific about that. They don't. And I'm going that's not exactly like a game thing. That's like really? It doesn't hurt the furniture. It might set them on fire, but it doesn't do any actual damage. Really?
Yeah, it's a strange thing to write in right there.
Well,
but you
it's
have
also,
people treating it that way and
is
working with the rules as given.
Right, but is that a game conceit or is that a narrative conceit? Because someone could say, well, yes, I fireballed him because I knew that the valuable artifacts in the room wouldn't be damaged by a fireball. Like, if I said it like that, it would sound like a narrative.
It can be both. Because, for example, let's talk about fireball. We had that situation earlier in a 5th edition game. Fireball is not an explosion, even though sometimes it's described as an explosion. Because if it were explosion, especially at what's called a high explosive, that is something that goes expansive at or faster than the speed of sound, and you do it in a crowded room, at least one of the people there is going to fly off. Right? If not, slam against the wall and take extra damage when they hit the ground.
I mean, my personal favorite of ludonarrative dissonance is the magic missile, because the magic missile is described as an evocation of force. It's not lightning, it's not fire, it's not even magic, it's force. But it's also specifically worded that it does not attack inanimate objects.
So force doesn't affect objects. Well, okay. Color me intrigued.
Well, the other spells that are force, like Force Wall and Big B Smashing Fist, those do. But Magic Missile and Evocation of Fortune, and like the weird, if you were in this world, the weird way you would have to describe this. I can't use Magic Missile to knock a bottle off of a table. It doesn't work on inanimate objects.
Right, and if we pull back a little bit, we can see like the reasonings behind these, because I believe in earlier editions, Fireball would destroy all the treasure in the room or melt the gold or something, and that's why you choose Cone of Cold.
Yeah. Cone of Cold.
And so they wrote it in later to say, no, we've changed this. Please don't hurt your players this way. And what was the second one we just brought up here?
Magic Missile.
Well, but it's good.
And the reason for Magic Missile is so that people don't go, I target their weapon and I break it automatically with 2d4 plus 2 damage.
Well, I
think they'll do it.
Or disarm anyone, right?
I think a thing that we should bring up that is like people talk about game versus narrative, but another thing that's related to this is the idea of romanticism versus realism.
Ooh, yes.
Romanticism is when we're making everything in the game larger than life, so our heroes can go ahead and do more stuff. Mm-hmm. Like, if you watch the Avengers movie, Hawkeye is still alive for some reason. It's like
he doesn't know either.
Well, one of my favorite things are jump cuts. Like, I'm so old, I'm going to bring up The Greatest American Hero for this, because it was like, you have this guy who could fly. He's a superhero outfit and he can fly. He would fly to a location, get there and land, and then the very next jump cut, the very next minute the door would open and the guy who was in a car has gotten there. He's just there. Why is
this
he there?
happens all the time in the Flash series, I believe, where the Flash will look away and someone on a motorcycle will be driving away. He's still in visible distance, and Flash just goes, darn, I guess he got away.
Right, and that's romanticism, as in we are bending the rules of even everything, even common sense, to let something happen. And that's true in both.
To enforce a genre.
Right. Well, right. And that's, or to keep the story going. Good romanticism is when it feels natural and fun. Bad romanticism is when your GM is just nerfing you. Or we make fun of this in bad movies. Like they got away from the Flash. They just ran away. I'll never catch them. It's not like I can fight anyway. So at some, and it's difficult to establish the level of you have to explain romanticism to players. The idea that we will break rules to make the story work better. And you're telling this to a bunch of people who showed up today, who you also told, by the way, you can't just play make-believe today. Here's 400 pages of rules on how we will play make-believe. By the way, we'll be breaking them whenever we feel like.
We'll also be having a quiz at the end of the session.
Yeah.
So that's my game.
And we have dice, which don't care either way.
And we will be rolling dice, which we will ignore. Right. So, like, and I'm being cynical about this, but I also think that there is some level that you can achieve where I think the problem is the games aren't having the discussion of romanticism. They're all saying it's a game, but you can also improvise. You can use these rules, but you can change them if you want. But they're not discussing why would you change them and what would you change them to be. Like what is the romanticism level of your game? And you're getting mixed signals from a lot of games, especially D&D, which D&D says you're a brave adventurer about to go on big squads. Okay, first level adventure. Here's a hobgoblin who does 2d6 plus 3 twice around.
Here are the kobolds who will have advantage against you because they outnumber you and will all be adjacent to you. So their friends will all get to hit you and you will die.
Here's 6 kobolds that do 6 points a hit because Dex adds the damage now. Ha ha! And can basically skeletonize a wizard in less than 6 seconds.
Anyone, really.
Honestly, you could ruin any adventure immediately by just saying, I have all the enemies attack one player. Bam. Okay, well, you ruined it.
Right, well, I mean, and that's been some, right, and obviously in a romantic conceit, because I've also seen, advice for GMs. It's got, one GM might run a cobbled encounter where one of them gets nuked the first round and all the rest of them run away because, scary magic. I thought we worship magic. Shut up. You know, and other GMs would have it that when you got there, all the kobolds would pop out of their hidey holes because they get bonuses to dig holes and ambush you. And then when you tried to run at them, you fall in the punji pits they dug in advance because, once again, kobolds. And like these are two different levels of romanticism. One of them is you're the heroes and you guys conquer everything and you're like an anime hero where everybody falls in love with you as soon as they see you. And the other one is the old school punish you for being alive. And both of those can be fun and different levels can be fun. But that's what we're talking about where the game, you know, I realize we got sidetracked from here, but it's not so much talking about what the people are going to want to take advantage in the game. And the game rules, the ludic imperative, is what's written on the page that tells them what they can do. And I realize that we've gotten away from that. We're asking, what are the unwritten rules and why didn't we write them down?
Right.
I would go even further because the sort of the hard rules, soft rules, and I made the example a long time ago about Candyland, right? The Lollipop Princess. If you write that in as a description, like the ecology of a monster, something like that, that is also part of the rule. And so it
I
also
expect to see
encourages
15 other orcs here.
Yeah, I expect to see this land, or I expect to see 51 for extra orcs that appear, or something like that, right? That is it. That's what the rule says, and I have an expectation of that.
Yeah, I mean, like I enjoy playing the game and knowing, like what I just quoted, kobolds get bonuses to dig pits and build traps, and they worship magic. Those are both things that have game mechanic effects, but also narrative effects. And when I play the game, my knowledge of the game is enriched because I know more about the game. Because no one said, like when someone says, I didn't know what was going on, that's not normally praise.
Yeah.
And, if some people will play a game and not know what's going on, and those are people we usually describe as people with low engagement. Once again, low engagement is not a positive thing.
Right, and I think we've hit upon this before, where if you want people to be engaged, you want to reward them for being willing to learn about the world and then being able to use what they know about the world in play. If those things don't match up, if you learn something about the world and then the GM says, no, actually, I've decided that you can't do that, then you actively know less than you started with.
Yeah.
Because at least if you went in without expectation, you wouldn't be surprised that it's different.
Yeah, like I'm usually a downer at some of the games because, I'm sitting there mashing the button to get to the cutscenes or just waiting for the box text to finish being read out loud. Because none of this matters to me. I don't affect any of it, you can run into cynical gamers. They might not be as bitter and ugly as me, but you'll run into cynical gamers who have already assimilated that this doesn't matter what's going on, and they'll sit there and listen politely, but they'll still do whatever it is they were going to do. Like I said, Mercer Effect, those people are paid to show up, so they're not paid to complain. So if something's happening in the game that they don't like or don't understanding, they have a job. They're there. I'm not saying they're not having fun, but I'm also saying they were told in advance that director tells them what's going on. And the rules may have informed them and may have given them some method into their characters that they can improvise. But they like a previous thing we had, they didn't show up with, I can't wait until I get to level 5 so I can throw fireballs. Mm-hmm. So they're or they're not, or I expect my character out to be the best dual wielder I could possibly do. I can't wait to dual wield in the game and show off how cool this is. They're not those people, that's not going through their brains, but that would be going through the brains of people who actually showed up to play. And so you would have to make a decision here. Are you obeying the ludic and letting them do these things that they want to do? Or do you have some sort of narrative that you want to impose on them, whether they want it or not?
Here's a solution I kind of propose to that one, is that you should write a story that goes with the gameplay. In other words, you have to understand what the basic of the gameplay is about it. One of the problems I've had with some even Dungeons and Dragons is that the adventuring party doesn't at some points. I mean, one could a criticism old school has is that they say, well, there's adventuring parties and they just do adventuring party things, and people are like, well, that doesn't make a lot of sense, right? What all these people running around with swords and stuff. Like, and so the newer versions are like, there's this medieval fantasy world that happens to have adventurers, but the adventurers don't seem to really have a role in the society unless it's extremely contrived, right? I guess we have to contrive a reason for adventuring.
Right, there's this separate alien entity that doesn't actually affect the world.
Are adventuring parties mercenaries that get hired by the nobility?
I'm confused.
Maybe, but we don't know.
Explain to me again why we let the commoners carry weapons.
Exactly.
Like, I'm not understanding why we let them do this.
Are they agents of the law? Are we in a state of civil war? You have
right, but it doesn't come up in.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, like, I know people. That's why I say people play these games to have fun, because people are complaining, like, well, why can't they want the games to feel empowering. Like, I'm not going to say anything that's controversial. So I'm going to skip over the controversy and go straight to, that's why people want to be able to carry weapons and kill things in the game, despite the fact that, like, almost any state entity, would make this illegal. And I always want to point out, like, just because they made it illegal doesn't mean you can't do it. I mean, people see you at MagFest when all you guys are
there are narrative consequences to the choices that you make. If you want to walk into the city with your weapon, people will not like you.
Why would there be a weapon shop? Why are they selling, mass phantasmal killer to the commoners?
I remember when I went down to the gun factory and picked up something. It doesn't work that way.
I can't buy Sudafed fertilizer, and you guys are off buying mass death spells.
Yeah.
And you don't even live in a country that has a Bill of Rights. But moving on from that, is like the big controversy I always have is, like, one of the mistakes that D&D made was they made resurrection so cheap and easy. So I'm constantly asking, why are you paying us more money than a resurrection costs? Why don't you just raise your dead from the dead?
Yeah.
But that got into another ludic imperative that I talked about, the everything proof underwear problem, where no matter how you solve a problem, they come up with some, like, kryptonite mountain or whatever to make it, not work. And once again, that's another bad romanticism of just suddenly explaining, like, whatever you thought was true was actually false. And I mean, like, here I am ragging on all those Mercer Effect games that people like, but and I'm not saying they don't have creative moments in those, but a lot of them they're not giving anyone any guff about what's going on because they're not there. They don't stop the game and say, well, how did this happen? That spell doesn't work that way. How did he teleport out of a crowd? Teleporting, is a spell that provokes opportunity attacks. They all could have just butchered him, but they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's actually, I'm going to address something that I was complaining about in an earlier podcast about the why don't you call the guards? And Rafferty said, well, it makes sense to call the guards because you have guards there. That's their job. And now I'm going to provide my own answer to my own question. Is because as a GM, I haven't really explained why is it your job to solve this particular object and not the guards. Are you someone who is empowered by the local ruler to be their special agents? Then of course it's your job because he hired you because he doesn't trust his guards to do it.
Well,
right?
then we'll
skip over that.
And I'm also pointing out, like, logic holes in this. Like, so what keeps us from showing up and blowing holes in things and blowing everything up? And the GM would say, well, if you were too violent or committed too many crimes, the town guard would stop you. Okay. What keeps NPCs from breaking the law and doing terrible stuff? The town guard only stops us? And, like, that's where I'm getting into, once again, ludic imperative. I mean, in other words, a huge mixed message is being sent, because every GM would agree with the statement, if the players are blatantly breaking the law, the town guard would stop them. But then there's the obverse of this of, if I catch other people breaking the law, I can't actually invoke the law to stop them. So the law only applies to players. Profiling.
Yeah. I mean, it's a thing also where it's why will someone get rid of this meddlesome priest situation? People with swords and maces and all that will take violent action if they have the opportunity to take violent action.
But what I'm getting at here is that if the game becomes it's too like narrative driven, like too linear and that kind of stuff, the players will stop suggesting things.
Yeah.
They might become more entertaining, like you might see in a podcast, because they already know that this is a game and everything is going to be level matched to be fair, and they can't actually lose. I mean, they might have might have bigger wins and smaller wins, so they're going to stop trying to be clever because they know it's probably not going to work. The only ones who are going to be clever are the GM's significant other problem, where they know the GM so well, they know the inside jokes that'll work on them, and they might kind of do that kind of stuff. But you'll wind up with, Mercer effect type stuff where people are just going along with it. And so all this material, all these pages of rules and source material, all that kind of stuff, isn't actually adding to the game because things are just happening because they're happening. It's not like I can manipulate this. Like I can't invoke the guard to come stop everybody. I can't send the guys to a cursed place where they'll actually trigger the undead. The undead will kill them. I can't get the Ents to come help me against the oncoming armies of the Horde.
Can't even ask the Eagles to take you anywhere, man.
I can't appeal to any parent or adult when the unnamed wizard is trying to kill me and I'm only a small child.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, if that's your world, then it's kind of like, like we could be romantic about it and shrug that off. But eventually your players will stop asking those questions and just play the game.
Become disengaged.
Heads down, play.
Yeah.
And if that's what you want, because now the game is going the way I want, that's fine. But you would also have to get all the players to buy into that. Like I'm always saying, like there's no bad games. It's just games that have trouble getting players to show up. Players won't, a player might show up. They were told this would be creative expression. They build a character that no one pays any attention to. They want to be cute or charming or special, but the rules don't give them that advantage, and no one takes them seriously. Like when they try to use diplomacy or stealth or anything like that, pre-scripted adventures end in combat anyway. And that player leaves the game. And they later, and there's lots of people who had that kind of churn. And if you ask them later, they'll say, "Yeah, I played it for a while, but it wasn't my thing."
Yeah.
So I think as designer, I'm going to go ahead and ask you, Rafferty. So when you're writing these books, what do you do to channel players towards what you want to have happen within your game that promotes your narrative and your Ludo at the same time? How do you write that?
Well, first of all, I'm a party pooper because I don't play heavy class-based games like Dungeons and Dragons for a reason that we already talked about in a previous podcast. D&D characters tend to be very highly specialized and not broad-based in their skills. And so you'll often wind up with a party where maybe one person has talking skills, but most of them don't. And also these games have told people, never split up the party, always travel in a big mob. Every time you meet monsters or in a box and kill them. I don't like to play those games because those already, speaking of rules and endorse behavior, people are already used to, that's what D&D is. And they get stuck in that, and that's not what I enjoy.
Right.
So I hate to say that. People are saying you could do different things with D&D. Yes, you can. Yes, I have. But that means I gotta get five people who are untrained in D&D. and then we'll be fighting the game. Yeah, and we'll be fighting the game the entire way.
I would say, sorry, from the design point of view, I go back to my point. You shouldn't actually write rules to enforce a narrative because, again, not everybody's going to be on page with that narrative. You create, you created a series of tools, in the way I see it, right? And those suggest possibilities, right? And then because I think one of the things also we have to talk about, when is the narrative created, right? Is it created before the game or after the game? Because if we're talking about the narrative created before the game, it is the narrative that somebody like the GM brings to the table. Again, director, boom, here it is. But if it's a narrative after the game, it's a narrative that goes like, oh, we had a great session last Saturday or whatever, and this happened and that was fun, and this guy rolled. And that's the narrative that emerges from the game.
Well, and you say after the game, I would say that's during the game. I mean, I mean, the entire purpose, I would argue that the entire purpose of the role-playing game is so we can all get together sometimes call this hot versus cool media. Like a movie or a book is cool. You watch it and it plays out in front of you. Whereas a video game is hot, and the fact is that the video game expects you to do some input every now and then to at least make it move along. And
right,
some
you
games
have to be an active participant in the media.
I gotta press X every now and then to not die. Or in the better, in some more involved games, they'll be emergent, and I can go on different paths and different solutions and have different things play out in front of me. The level of hotness to coolness changes. And so the purpose of a tabletop game is I would argue, to be extremely hot and involved. That we're not a computer game, I expect, to be limited by the assets that they have and the coding they were able to do and the voice acting they were able to hire that day. I don't expect the same thing of a tabletop game. I would expect it would be a little looser than that. And that's why you have the problem of Dungeons and Dragons being lowest common denominator, because I'm constantly complaining about these caper adventures that they would have where you go to explore stuff. And the one thing they know that every player can do is fight. Every player has combat spells, combat abilities, and hit points, and an attack bonus. So they make sure that there's always combat sessions. So moving on, what I usually do, what I like to do is, first of all, get away from that. Secondly, is I'm not a big fan of level matching. I wrote the section in the Urban Jungle game about how to design an adventure, because I think a lot of games they discuss how to GM, but they don't discuss what do you do to prepare an adventure. And I prefer to have my adventures very character-driven. And by character-driven, I also mean the NPCs. Like, I've seen some talk these days about fronts, where you are supposed to write down what an obstacle is, and if people don't engage with it, it will go off and do its own thing. Not what I would call front, but sure. For example, the Thieves Guild want to take over the Southern District. If no one stops them in a certain amount of time, they will take over the Southern District. Or, the cult of Blucka, the blood god, is going to raise their thing from the dead. If no one stops them in 6 days, they're done.
Right, it's so that you can have the world that is moving and active and lives in some regard. Players' actions or inactions will affect it.
Right. The issue I have with a lot of level-based matching and that kind of stuff is that's creating, speaking of how the ludic imperative changes the world, the idea that threats scale up or down, down to meet me all the time implies that the world is artificial. Like, if I spent more time leveling up, I would just fight a higher level thing. One of my favorite jokes from Order of the Stick. Hey, the guy wanted 500 for these rubies, but I talked him down to 400. Well, the spell requires 500 gold pieces worth of rubies, so go back and buy more.
Yeah.
It's like, like that's the ultimate slamming on you of, here I came up with a narrative thing of, hey, I haggled the guy down and used my haggling skill. Well, the spell requires 500 GP, so the ludic says you wasted everyone's time. So instead, the world, instead of saying 500 carats of rubies, it says 500 gold piece worth of rubies. So you wind up this artificial thing, and I don't like that. I like the idea that the world is filled with, people that you can interact with that have their own paradigms and what they want to get done. Most people in the world don't have on their list, kill the PCs. I mean, like, at least starting out. Like that's why D&D got in a lot of hot water over the concept of evil. What, these bad guys are just evil. They don't need a reason. They're evil. They want to kill you and eat your babies. They're evil.
Kill them
and
because
like,
evil.
Right, and we want to stop them because they're evil. And no matter what we do to stop them, instead, like a real world, with more interesting in like Waterdeep or those more intriguing locations where here's a villain and they want to do something because they want to conquer the world or they want to enslave the free people. An evil goal, but they're getting something out of it. They're getting more land, more power, more estate, more bragging rights, more stats with their evil deities, something that gives them some sort of benefit. And you can interact with these people because you can because they have a goal that's other than kill you. They might start to do, which is one of my favorite things, and this goes against all GMing advice. It's going to floor everybody. The bad guys might start to work around you.
I try to avoid you.
I mean, yeah, this is a thing that shows, because Longhands and Ironclaw, like Theta and Griffin here. Well, my bad guys will do that. In fact, my bad guys will even do one of my favorite things to do to players is Give them the combat to engage them when the bad guys throw some money at some losers and say, here, I'm rich, go kill these people I don't like. And while you're doing that, I'm going to go do something important. Keep them distracted. It's a common trope that shows up in narrative, but you don't see a lot in gaming, because in gaming, the paradigm is always, we must, throw ourselves at them. Like Dragon Heist drives me crazy because it's not because a bunch of guys try to kill our players in broad daylight. No, it's the bad guys send their own to come kill you in broad daylight. And then they have clues on them of where they came from. So it's effectively telling them where your HQ is. It's like, if you just spent 5 minutes and sent plainclothes guys. So, but this, of course, has the problem where you are forcing the players to become engaged. But this is why I kind of like the ideas of fronts, which was the idea that you tell the players, if you are inactive and not involving yourselves in the story is going to play out without you. And it's going to play out in a way you don't like.
Right.
Now,
but of course, this always comes to the point of what the players say, no, wait a second, we don't want to be involved with the adventure, which could be a valid choice.
Well, in fact, that's another thing that drives me nuts, is that is a valid choice. If the players say, I don't want to do this, I don't care. I mean, the players are saying they don't want to do this and they don't care. Why would you make them play an adventure they don't care about?
Right, exactly. You shouldn't force people into that position. And if you're being open and honest as a GM, you communicate to them. It's like, hey, this is the thing I wanted to do. Is everyone cool with this ahead of time?
Which also shows that I also don't play games where player characters don't care about anything.
Yeah.
Like I had this weird accusation of, like, some people said, like, everyone in your game is a mercenary who kills for money. It's like, you mean like D&D? except in the games I'm talking about, you had to write down a personality and a motto and a starting goal. Like, every character has to write down something they care about in the world.
Right.
Like,
you're not an adventure if you want to stay at home.
If I go play D&D, half the party is unaligned neutral and the other half of the party is chaotic good. They don't care about anything. Like as much as I love the Tyrant Queen adventure that they wrote for D&D, they assume that since day one you give a care if the evil armies destroy, not the Sword Coast. Where is Waterdeep? Yeah, I'm losing my
It is the Sword Coast.
Yeah, so
you give a care if the Sword Coast is taken over by dragons. Like they assume that from day one that this is something you care about. Like, I need to defend Waterdeep.
About, like, the lords offering you to come in to tell you about,
especially
like, all the ways you're going to help.
Those lords of Waterdeep who we don't know who they are, and if we do know who they are, one of them's a beholder. Yeah, I care about them. Oh, I better save them. That's so important that they get through this okay. They have to throw my life down.
If you find out that the identity of one of them, they'll actually try to kill you. Because
and if I even knew you were, so I had to save a bunch of people I don't know who they are, and would sure, I'm in the front lines on this one. But moving on from there, I mean, like that does require you, and getting back into kind of the Mercer effect, and like I said, unwritten rules. That does get back in the idea that you would need to have players who know what the game is about and care about solving it. The problem you just mentioned of, what if my players don't want to solve the problem? You in a story, we would be giving this, like a narrative, we would give the narrative bad marks of asking, why is this person trying to do all of this? What's their motivation? If we don't know why they're risking their lives or getting into this, we would say this is a poor story, because I don't know why anyone would actually do this. Right.
You have to actually give motivations. You can't just say, well, I want you to do this.
Right. So in that's no different from the tabletop. If you're gonna, like, it's not that hard to this gets into a larger thing maybe we should make a whole thing about, which is, like, the players aren't allowed to do whatever the hell they want. The players are obligated to come to the table with characters who give a care about what's going on in the game. That's the flip side of, no bad games, just players who leave. Like, you set up in advance, this is what my game is about. Like, if we play Masks, we say, this is our game about superpowered teens who have great power and great responsibility. Or if we're going to play a Harry Potter game, we would say, everyone, you're part of this school and your goal is to graduate alive. You can give everybody, like, a common goal. and tell them that. Like, I think there's a lot of gaming that says, now you show up in a chaotic evil warlock. Freedom to do what you want. Like if story matters to you, you can tell the players, you can invoke the Mercer effect. You can tell your players, I need you to make a character that has motivation and cares about this. A real actor would ask, what's my motivation in the scene?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's also very important. Also, going back to the kind of situation with the rules enforcing behavior or signaling behavior. I think one of the interesting things, also we talked about in the last podcast about splat books and the like, is that ironically, the spells, the abilities, and all that can actually you can have a situation in the rules encourage you to break the game, right? That why don't you use a spell that solves the problem automatically? I said, well, why did you set up a world where a rule that allows your spell to solve that automatically, right? Or what I call the magic number in the game, like if you have a plus 20, why do you have something that creates the idea that at plus 25 everything should be automatic? Well, at plus 5 everything should be assured, right?
Right. If you don't want players to do something, don't tell them they can do it.
Well, it's also I'm just gonna say it's shitty game design. Like like I'm here I am once again pounding the gong for D&D 4. D&D 4 went through and got rid of a lot of these spells that automatically derailed storylines. They got rid of teleporting anywhere you want to go as a single action. They got rid of spells that you could ask. They made them more narrative based. Like the Helping Hand is my favorite, where you can summon a hand and it will answer your questions, but it can only answer your questions as a single hand floating in space could do. So it could point, it could give you the thumbs up or the thumbs down, it could do a couple other things, but that's all it can do.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to ask more complicated questions, it can't do that. And if you want to ask things, even when you want to ask, where's the bad guy, it could just point. It's like, okay, I guess he's north by northwest and a 32-degree attic, guys.
How far away?
How far away? Like, farther? No, farther than that. Okay, but I mean, but that's interesting from a narrative point of view. It would be using our tools. See, that's the one thing that always gets to me when people say I have a story. It's like the opposite is, well, you told us we had these tools, but then you get your players in that mindset of, you told us we had these tools, but we can't actually use them to solve the problem. We're back to a Sierra computer game where the only way to solve the problem is to use whatever bizarre moon logic the adventure requires. And because dead air is boring, unlike a Sierra game, if we wait long enough, eventually the solution will show up and present itself with no penalty to us whatsoever. And I'm against that. If it's supposed to be a narrative, but on the other hand, I'll punish players for not having skills because I'm playing point-based games. And I'm saying, well, look, if you had this skill, you would have been able to defeat this challenge more easily, but you didn't. So when we give you
specialize
points,
in jumping.
If only all of you knew how to swim. But then I'm also playing games that after it's over, it's like you guys all flounder in the water and got your butts kicked. Everyone gets swimming as your reward for the adventure because I play games like that instead of vague experience points to give you. And then I don't feel bad when it comes up again. It's like I gave all of you swimming, but by narrative purposes, it's kind of like bad guys would be looking for advantage. This is the thing that annoys me. Bad guys wouldn't say we need to go engage the player characters. Let's all change that 4 above our heads to 18 so we're the right level, and then go engage them because we magically level up to everything. Bad guys would be looking at their resources and saying, okay, this is what we've got. This is the big thing I was talking about with the guards problem, where it's kind of in theory, the players are supposed to fear the guards because whatever the guards are or whatever authority is, it's more powerful enough to smack them down. But players aren't allowed to fear bad guys. If a bad guy shows up, no player would say, I don't want to tangle with that because that's a monolithic organization that's more powerful than me. Games like D&D and Pathfinder send the message, if I piss these guys off, they will send experience points on the hoof.
Yeah, and that even happens in Dragon Heist, where there's 4 different options for antagonists, and one of them is a character which owns literally everything and is a horrifying assassin that you cannot kill. And, you're just supposed to say, yeah, I'm totally going to take him on. I'm just
Oh
going
my
to do
god.
it. No one's ever succeeded, but it's going to be me.
Yeah, it's like
the-
you have, for example, characters that
Which
are
I
wearing
think,
are wearing leather
well,
armor, and the bad guy shows up in full plate with skulls everywhere, and you're like, oh, we're gonna take that guy on because
the skulls means
experience
he's
one.
friendly.
Yeah,
Which I think probably gets into the matter of making sure that in the game design that there are clear goals for the players to go for, and if it's going to be murder, they're going to try to fight the goddamn assassin.
I mean,
well, and then the ludonarrative dissonance moment, like I like to call this the Uncharted moment, but like in Assassin's Creed, where, well, we better solve the mystery of Jack the Ripper. I heard he's killed up to 5 women as you step over the 24 bodies you left in the alleyway to find this out. And,
I mean, one of the things is one of the reasons why I prefer goal orientated, adventure design as opposed to XP, just kill the monsters, is because that's one mechanic that encourages players to think outside of, the murder everything. It's like, can you achieve this by not killing?
I'm not even saying you don't have to kill. Like I love Redwall. And Redwall is one of the most violent series you could ever read.
Yeah.
But the bad guys in that, often have an objective. Most of it is we want Redwall Abbey because it's strategically important. We want to kill all the warriors and enslave all the civilians.
Or we've taken like a handful of them. We're done. We're leaving, and now the heroes want to go.
Oh yeah, or even better, like, hey, while we're besieging your abbey, we kidnap some of your people and already put them to work, and then our heroes have to go save them. Usually it's like bizarrely cutesy how they do it, but it's at least an objective you can understand of, well, they want to enslave us and we don't want to be enslaved. It's like an easy objective to understand. And and the bad guys
but that's what I'm saying about mechanics and behavior. Addictive behavior is that if, for example, we have a mechanic that says kill, get XP versus defeat, conquer, solve, etc. More goal-based, more broader aspect, like doesn't require you, doesn't demand. Remember, it's demand, encourage, and allow, or and doesn't demand murder. Then players might go like, well, I murder is an option. I probably murder, but I don't have to.
Well, and all you got is a tool.
And this gets into like what I've been calling the Superman problem, which is everyone keeps saying Superman's not an interesting character because he's too indestructible. Mm-hmm. Except I can, there were dozens of stories before Kryptonite was.
And except that he's the most popular character on the planet.
Right. I mean, he's synonymous with superhero. So there's lots of stories that made it interesting. But what made it interesting was that it was often something happens somewhere else, and Superman has to stop it. And sometimes Superman has to do a creative interpretation of his abilities to stop it, because he used to fight corporate people and strikebreakers and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but you can't defeat Superman, but Superman can fail.
Right, and I think a big problem with the stories as narrative goes is that a lot of the games are written around the players as selfish people who care about nothing but themselves. And also, the only thing we can depend on players to do is combat. And so a lot of the adventures you see are written in a very, the narrative itself has framed it for the comfort of the players. They can go to a town and easily buy and sell weapons. They can then go to a dungeon and the hallways are all clearly lit and all the enemies are clearly labeled evil. You can slaughter all of them and get to the end. Might be difficult, might not. You can even camp in the middle of a room and rest for 24 hours and no one will disturb you. And that's a lot of fun for a lot of people, but it's also, if you read this as a story, a lot of us would be scratching our heads going, this is why they, we always say it's boring for other people to tell you about their campaigns. If you wanted to tell a much bigger epic story, I want to, get away from the players as the focus and the players as basically antagonists, the players as we're here to upset the balance. something is going to happen and we have to stop it. And then don't have already predetermined other players are going to stop it and let them get involved. And to make that work, you would have to get back to the ludic imperative here of all of the tools. We gave you books and these rules and fireballs and spells. All of these tools at your disposal that we've described are ways to solve this problem. And we told you how they work. That's the rules. We told so you solve the problem with the tools that I might add you consciously chose because it's 2021 and every choice in your character sheet is one you made. I'm not
even choosing the game was your choice. You decided this is how you would like to be able to solve problems in front of you.
And also another message we have to send is, and if you don't have these abilities, you need to find people who do or get things that will solve the problem for you, a subquest to get it. And letting your players be creative about how they solve the problem. This, I think, is the huge issue that's all over this. If all it is players have to get in fights and crack jokes, they don't have to be creative. They just have to wait for the fight to show up and then stab it. And since the fight will always be leveled to them, this won't require creative solutions or improvising or anything. And if that's not something you value in your game, you can just play these games as written. If you want to encourage players to be creative, you have to honor the rules and what the rules gets. Every time you break the rules, you're smacking your players and saying, no, don't be creative. Don't color outside the lines.
Right. And it's important, as I think we said before, to not browbeat your players into not being engaged anymore.
I mean, you can still, if you guys love Critical Role, that's fine. What usually just drives me nuts about that is most of that is a bunch of people cracking a bunch of jokes that I didn't even, maybe I just hate them.
So I think we're going ahead and hitting on time here. So let's go ahead and do some concluding thoughts. What do we have left to say about rules endorsing behaviors as a conclusion? Rafferty?
Well, obviously, we put that in our games, so obviously we're champions of that. The thing I enjoy the most about role-playing games is seeing the creativity of the players, seeing them make characters that mean something to them, make choices, and then trying to get those choices to pay off later in a story that they make themselves. And like I just said, the rules are telling the players what they can and can't do. You can still have a lot of fun in an improv game where there are no rules and everybody's kind of improvising stuff. But on the other hand, you can also, those games turn more into like trying to schmooze the GM and arguments about what things can and can't do. The theory is the rules should have already settled all of this and it already told people this is our world, this is the magic, and I would love to see players make informed choices based on this world that we all agree on, rather than something vague. And seeing us work together to make a story that plays out in a way, and then every now and then rolling. The other reason we have rules is to roll dice to shake it up. Because if you try, I've done freeform role play before, and one problem is that nobody wants to admit failure, or it gets static. That's why we have rules when we said, okay, you have a 70% chance to hit. So those rare good rolls and all too common bad rolls lead to an emergence that you wouldn't expect to see. And that's what makes it exciting. It's like, this isn't the story I would have told, but it's the story that I'm in right now, so I got to roll with it. And those rules work hand in hand with the narrative that you're telling. So basically, I would just say, we need to stop talking about how these are two separate things. They need to work together. They need to be on the same imperative.
Yeah.
All right. Lessons what you got.
As a follow-up with that, basically, look at the rules and write and play to the strengths of those rules, but also understand their limitations, because it could be a situation where these particular set of rules don't do what you want them to do as well. Yeah. We haven't talked about that, but that is also true. And so to me, it's always, and this comes from my analysis of video games. That's why I brought the whole thing. You write for the game that you are playing, right? That's what you do. And that requires understanding what the rules demand. And therefore, that's how you mesh them together, right? And hopefully that, reduces a lot of the friction that can arise from this.
Yeah, I want to quickly build on that by saying, one thing we were complaining about is unwritten rules. Like, you can't just do whatever you want. You might want to do something that's not written in the book, but a lot of GMs will have stuff that they let go and let don't. And you have to, like they say, you have to game with your group for a while to figure that out. That's great. Build that into your game. You know, work together with your players to understand if something didn't happen the way they wanted. Like, I always endorse debriefing after the game is over, so you can discuss with the players what they liked and what they didn't, so you guys can suss out. The game is about getting outside of our comfort zones. Like, you could just go write a story. You write your own story. No one will give you any crap. Upload it day or 3. We're done.
Well, I mean, they might give you some, but you can upload it.
You can upload it and comments off. I mean, if you didn't want other people to give you input on the story, then you wouldn't be playing a role-playing game.
Mm-hmm.
You'd be hiring a bunch of actors.
Yeah, and I think you two hit upon like everything I wanted to say. So good job right there.
Yeah, I guess to give the final point, it's not your story; it's our story.
Yes,
even more so. No story exists. Like most things in role-playing games, don't exist until they hit the table. Remember that as well.
Yeah, and I will agree that every group is different, and some people will have different things they want to do than others. I always talk about the platonic ideal. That somewhere the perfect role-playing game would be the book game that you could hand to somebody and say, "Read this," and then everything in it would be understandable as what we're going to do today. Now, I say platonic because that means it's impossible. Like, no game would be perfect, but there are games that will fight you more than others on that.
Yeah.
And you gotta choose a good grind, and consider more material, and also like make those, and don't blame your players for this. I think that's the huge thing. I think we all agree on that. Players just also want to have fun and to have an active part in the game, and some of them don't understand what you're on about, and some of them came because the game told them they could do something, and they're looking for a game where they can do that. Game told me I could be a tiefling. I'm looking for a game where I can play a tiefling. If you're not going to allow tieflings, you're going to make tieflings miserable in your game, I would be sad. That's an unwritten rule. So, we need to work together with each other. And I mean, everyone always agrees we need to work together and have fun. Not everybody actually.
Yeah, build up, have fun.
Yeah.
All right. So
that's
going to be it for this episode of Notes from the Aleph. We stream episodes bi-weekly Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can join us live at twitch.tv/Ractus. We also stream and record weekly tabletop games at the same channel, and you can come join us when we start at 10 a.m., 2 p.m., and 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Sundays and Wednesdays. Norman Rafferty here is a partner and writer for Sanguine Games. Check out sanguinegames.com, join us on Reddit and Twitter, and look forward to the upcoming Book of Quarrels Ironclaw expansion book. Don't forget to check out Lesson Learned at Lesson Learned 1 on Twitch and YouTube, where he has a number of series that you all should all go and see. And, of course, go ahead and check out all of his cool books as well. And, everyone, don't forget to be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and come see us all again. Until next time. See ya.